The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F by Mark Manson. Our culture is obsessively focused on unrealistically positive expectations. Be happier, be healthier, be the best, better than the rest. Be smarter, faster, richer, sexier, more popular, more productive, more envied, and more admired. Ironically, this fixation on the positive, on what's better, what's superior, only serves to remind us over and over again of what we are not, of what we lack, of what we should have been but failed to be. After all, no truly happy person feels the need to stand in front of a mirror and recite that she's happy. She just is. A confident man doesn't feel a need to prove that he's confident. A rich woman doesn't feel a need to convince anybody she's rich. Either you are or you are not. And if you're dreaming of something all the time, then you're reinforcing the fact that you are not that. Everyone in their TV commercial wants you to believe that the key to a good life is a nicer job or a more rugged car, or a prettier girlfriend, or a hot tub with an inflatable pool for the kids. The world is constantly telling you that the path to a better life is more, more, more. Buy more, make more, own more, be more. You're constantly bombarded with messages to care about everything, all the time. Care about a new TV. Care about having a better vacation than your coworkers. Why? My guess is because caring about more stuff is good business. But the problem is, it's bad for your mental health. It causes you to be overly attached to the superficial and fake, to dedicate your life to chasing a mirage of happiness and satisfaction. Here's the problem. Our society today, through the wonders of consumer culture and the "hey, look at my life, it's cooler than yours" social media, has bred a whole generation of people who believe that having these negative experiences, anxiety, fear, guilt, etc., is totally not okay. I mean, if you look at your Facebook feed, everybody there is having a grand old time. You're bombarded with 350 images of people totally happy and having amazing lives, and it's possible to not feel like there's something wrong with you. Because there's an infinite amount of things we can now see or know, there's also an infinite number of ways we can discover that we don't measure up, that we're not good enough, that things aren't as great as they could be. And this rips us apart inside. Alan Watts used to refer to the backwards law, the idea that the more you pursue feeling better all the time, the less satisfied you become, as pursuing something only reinforces the fact you lack it in the first place. The more desperately you want to be rich, the more poor and unworthy you feel, regardless of how much money you actually make. What should be the focus is essentially learning how to focus and prioritize your thoughts effectively, how to pick and choose what matters to you and what does not matter to you based on finely honed personal values. Not caring does not mean being indifferent. It means being comfortable with being different. Indifferent people are afraid of the world and the repercussions of their own choices. That's why they don't make any meaningful choices. The point isn't to get away from stuff. The point is to find the stuff you enjoy dealing with. If you find yourself constantly caring about trivial shit that bothers you, like your ex-boyfriend's new Facebook profile picture, etc., chances are you don't have much going on in your life to legitimately care about. And that's your real problem. When a person has no problems, the mind automatically finds a way to invent some. It then follows that finding something important and meaningful in your life is perhaps the most productive use of your time and energy. Because if you don't find that meaningful something, your energy will be given to meaningless and frivolous causes. We're facing a psychological epidemic, one in which people no longer realize it's okay for things to suck sometimes. In reality, some suffering is always inevitable. No matter what you do, life is comprised of failures, loss, regrets, and even death. The goal is to turn your pain into a tool, your trauma into power, and your problems into slightly better problems. Happiness is a problem. There's a premise that underlies a lot of our assumptions and beliefs. The premise is that happiness is algorithmic, that it can be worked for and earned and achieved as if it were getting accepted into law school or building a really complicated Lego set. If I achieve X, then I can be happy. If I look like Y, then I can be happy. This premise, though, is a problem. Happiness is not a solvable equation. We suffer for the same reason that suffering is biologically useful. It is nature's preferred agent for inspiring change. Pain, in all of its forms, is our body's most effective means of spurring action. Physical pain is a product of our nervous system. a feedback mechanism to give us a sense of our own physical proportions, where we can and cannot move, and what we can and cannot touch. When we exceed those limits, our nervous system duly punishes us to make sure that we pay attention and never do it again. And this pain is useful. It helps show us what is good for us versus what is bad for us. Happiness comes from solving problems. The key word here is solving. If you're avoiding your problems or feel like you don't have any problems, then you're going to make yourself miserable. The secret sauce is in the solving of the problems, not in having problems in the first place. To be happy, we need something to solve. Happiness is therefore a form of action. If I ask you, what do you want out of life? And you say something like, I want to be happy and have a great family and a job I like. Your response is so common and expected, it doesn't really mean anything. Everybody wants that. It's easy to want that. A more interesting question, a question that most people never consider is, what pain do you want in your life? What are you willing to struggle for? Because that seems to be a greater determinant of how our lives turn out. What determines your success isn't, what do you want to enjoy? The relevant question is, what pain do you want to sustain? If at any point you think you're allowed to stop climbing, I'm afraid you're missing the point, because the joy is in the climb itself. You are not special. Sometime in the 1960s, developing high self-esteem, having positive thoughts and feelings about oneself, became all the rage in psychology. Participation awards and bogus trophies were invented for any number of mundane and expected activities. We're not all exceptional. Merely feeling good about yourself doesn't really mean anything unless you have a good reason to feel good about yourself. It turns out that adversity and failure are actually useful and even necessary for developing strong-minded and successful adults. Most of us are pretty average at most things we do. Even if you're exceptional at one thing, chances are you're average or below average at most other things. That's just the nature of life. To become truly great at something, you have to dedicate shit tons of time and energy to it. And because we all have limited time and energy, few of us ever become truly exceptional at more than one thing, if anything at all. We're all, for the most part, pretty average people. The problem is, the pervasiveness of technology and the mass marketing is screwing up a lot of people's expectations for themselves. The inundation of the exceptional makes people feel worse about themselves, makes them feel like they need to be more extreme, more radical, and more self-assured to get noticed or even matter. It has become an accepted part in our culture today to believe that we are all destined to do something truly extraordinary. We deserve greatness. This statement is inherently contradictory. After all, if everyone were extraordinary, then by definition, no one would be extraordinary. Being average has become the new standard of failure. The rare people who do become truly exceptional at something do so not because they believe they're exceptional. On the contrary, they become amazing because they're obsessed with improvement. People who become great at something become great because they understand that they're not already great. They are mediocre, they are average, and that they could be so much better. The value of suffering. If suffering is inevitable, if our problems in life are unavoidable, then the problem we should be asking is not, how do I stop suffering, but why am I suffering? For what purpose? Our values determine the metrics by which we measure ourselves and everyone else. If you want to change how you see your problems, you have to change what value and or how you measure failure and success. There are a handful of common values that create really poor problems for people. Problems that can hardly be solved. First one is pleasure. Pleasure is great, but it's a horrible value to prioritize your life around. Pleasure is a false god. Research shows that people who focus their energy on superficial pleasures end up more anxious, more emotionally unstable, and more depressed. Pleasure is the most superficial form of life satisfaction and therefore the easiest to obtain and the easiest to lose. And yet, pleasure is what's marketed to us 24/7. It's what we fixate on. Pleasure is not the cause of happiness, rather, it's the effect. If you get the other stuff right, the values and the metrics, then pleasure will naturally occur as a byproduct. Material success. Many people measure their self-worth based on how much money they make or what kind of car they drive, or whether their front lawn is greener and prettier than the next door neighbors. Research shows that once one is able to provide the basic physical needs, food, shelter, etc., the correlation between happiness and worldly success quickly approaches zero. The other issue with overvaluing material success is the danger of prioritizing it over other values, such as honesty, nonviolence, and compassion. When people measure themselves not by their behavior, but by the status symbols they're able to collect, they're not only shallow, but they're probably assholes as well. Always being right. As humans, we're pretty much wrong constantly. The fact is, people who base their self-worth on being right about everything prevent themselves from learning from their mistakes. They lack the ability to take on new perspectives and empathize with others. They close themselves off to new and important information. It's far more helpful to assume that you're ignorant and don't know a whole lot. This promotes a constant state of learning and growth. Staying positive. There are those who measure their lives by the ability to be positive about everything. The truth is, sometimes life sucks, and the healthiest thing you can do is admit it. Constant positivity is a form of avoidance, not a valid solution to life's problems. Problems which should be invigorating you and motivating you. Negative emotions are a necessary component of emotional health. To deny that negativity is to perpetuate problems rather than solve them. The trick with negative emotions is to express them in a socially acceptable and healthy manner, and express them in a way that aligns with your values. When we force ourselves to stay positive all the time, we deny the existence of life's problems. And when we deny our problems, we rob ourselves of the chance to solve them and generate happiness. Problems add a sense of meaning and importance to our life. Thus, to duck our problems is to lead a meaningless existence. The point is to nail down some good values and metrics, and pleasure and success will naturally emerge as a result. These things are side effects of good values. By themselves, they are empty highs. Values are about prioritization. What are the values you prioritize above everything else, and that therefore influence your decision making more than anything else? This, in a nutshell, is what self-improvement is really about. Prioritizing better values, choosing better things to care about. Because when you care about better things, you get better problems. And when you get better problems, you get a better life. You are always choosing. Imagine that somebody puts a gun to your head and tells you that you have to run 26.2 miles in under 5 hours, or else he'll kill you and your entire family. Now imagine that you bought nice shoes and trained for months and completed your first marathon with all your closest family and friends cheering you on at the finish line. Exact same 26.2 miles, exact same person running them. Exact same pain coursing through your exact same legs. But when you chose it freely and prepared for it, it was a glorious and important milestone in your life. When it was forced upon you against your will, it was one of the most terrifying and painful experiences of your whole life. Often, the only difference between a problem being powerful and painful is the sense in how we choose it, and that we are responsible for it. We don't always control what happens to us, but we always control how we interpret what happens to us, as well as how we respond. A lot of people hesitate to take responsibility for their problems because they believe that to be responsible for your problems is also to be at fault for your problems. Responsibility and fault often appear together in our culture, but they're not the same thing. Fault is past tense. Responsibility is present tense. Fault results from choices that have already been made. Responsibility results from choices you're currently making. We all love to take responsibility for our success and happiness. Hell, we often fight over who gets to be responsible for success and happiness. Taking responsibility for our problems is far more important, because that's where the real learning comes from. To simply blame others is to only hurt yourself. Failure is the way forward. The failure and success paradox. Improvement at anything is based on thousands of tiny failures, and the magnitude of your success is based on how many times you failed at something. If someone is better than you at something, it's likely because she has failed at it more than you have. If someone is worse than you, it's likely because he hasn't been through all of the painful learning experiences you have. If you think about a young child trying to walk, that child will fall down and hurt itself hundreds of times. But at no point does that child ever stop and think, "Oh, I guess walking just isn't for me. I'm not good at it." Avoiding failure is something we learn at some later point in life. I'm sure a lot of it comes from our education system, which judges rigorously based on performance and punishes those who don't do well. Another large share of it comes from overbearing or critical parents who don't let their kids screw up enough on their own. And then we all have that mass media which constantly exposes us to stellar success after success, while not showing us the thousands of hours of dull practice and tedious minutes that were required to achieve that success. At some point, most of us reach a place where we're afraid to fail, where we instinctively avoid failure and stick to only what is placed in front of us or only what we're good at. This confines and stifles us. We can only truly be successful at something we're willing to fail at. If we're unwilling to fail, then we're unwilling to succeed. If your metric for the value success by worldly standards is buy a house and a nice car, and you spend 20 years working your ass off to achieve it, once it's achieved, the metric has nothing left to give you. Then say hello to your midlife crisis, because the problem that drove your entire life was just taken away from you. There are no other opportunities to keep growing and improving, and yet it's growth that generates happiness, not a long list of arbitrary achievements. Feel free to fail, and that failure will move you forward. The importance of saying no. Consumer culture is very good at making us want more, more, more. Underneath all the hype in marketing is the implication that more is always better. I bought into this idea for years. Make more money, visit more countries, have more experiences, be with more women. But more is not always better. In fact, the opposite is true. We are often happier with less. When we're overloaded with opportunities and options, we suffer from what psychologists call the paradox of choice. Basically, the more options we are given, the less satisfied we become with whatever we choose, because we're aware of all the other options we're potentially forfeiting. So if you have a choice between two places to live, and pick one, you'll likely feel confident and comfortable that you made the right choice. You'll be satisfied with your decision. But if you have a choice among 28 places to live and pick one, the paradox of choice says that you'll likely spend years agonizing, doubting, and self-guessing yourself, wondering if you truly made the right choice, and if you're really maximizing your happiness. And this anxiety, this desire for certainty and perfection and success will make you unhappy. But while investing deeply in one person, one place, one job might deny us the breadth of experience we'd like, pursuing a breadth of experience denies us the opportunity to experience the rewards of depth of experience. There are some experiences that you can have only when you've lived in the same place for 5 years, or when you've been with the same person for over a decade, or when you've been working on the same skill or craft for half your lifetime. And then you die. Death is the light by which shadow of all life's meaning is measured. Without death, everything would feel inconsequential, all experience arbitrary, all metrics and values suddenly zero. In order to compensate for our fear of the inevitable loss of our physical self, we will try to construct a conceptual self that will live forever. This is why people try so hard to put their names on buildings, on statues. It is why we feel compelled to spend so much time giving ourselves to others, especially to children, in the hopes that our influence, our conceptual self, will last way beyond our physical self, that we will be remembered and revered and idolized long after our physical self ceases to exist. All the meaning in our life is shaped by this innate desire to never truly die. Death confronts us all with a far more painful and important question. What is your legacy? How will the world be different and better when you're gone? What mark will you have made? What influence would you have caused? This is arguably the only important question in our life, yet we avoid thinking about it. 1, because it's hard. 2, because it's scary. 3, because we have no idea what we're doing. Primary lesson from death is, there is nothing to be afraid of. Ever. Go out there. Stop caring about what doesn't matter, and start caring about what does. If this video added value to your life, please like, comment, and subscribe.